The arena of Titans had never known silence like this before, and the millions of beings who filled its massive seats were holding their breath as they watched the strange creature walk onto the fighting floor. Below them, Commander Zethrak stood in the center of the arena, his four massive arms crossed over his chest, and his compound eyes scanning the entrance tunnel with a look that showed nothing but boredom and perhaps a small amount of pity for whatever fool was about to face him. He was the greatest warrior the galaxy had ever produced, and everyone in attendance knew this simple truth as well as they knew their own names. For over 200 cycles, Zethrak had stood undefeated in this very arena, and his record spoke of absolute dominance that no species had ever come close to matching. 47 star systems had sent their strongest champions to face him, and 47 star systems had watched their heroes carried away in pieces or surrendering in terror before the first minute had passed. The Vorkay Empire had bred him for war, and his body was a perfect machine of destruction that seemed almost unfair when placed against any other living creature. His exoskeleton could stop plasma rounds and energy blades, and his four arms each carried enough strength to crush the hull plating of a warship with nothing but raw muscle power. He stood 8 feet tall, and his weight was nearly 1,000 pounds of pure killing potential, wrapped in dark chitinous armor that gleamed under the arena lights. The Galactic Council had used him for centuries as their ultimate enforcer, and whenever a new species needed to learn its place in the order of things, they would send that species to face Zethrak in the arena of Titans. Most species surrendered their territorial claims and submitted to Council authority the moment they saw him, and those foolish enough to actually fight rarely lasted long enough to regret their choice. Today was supposed to be another simple demonstration of power, and the Council had expected this matter to be resolved within minutes. A newly discovered species called humans had sent a request for full membership in the Galactic Council, and they had done so with a confidence that had puzzled and amused the elder races. These humans came from a small planet called Earth in an unremarkable solar system on the outer edge of the galaxy, and their technology was primitive compared to the great civilizations that ruled the stars. They had only achieved faster than light travel within the last century, and their military capabilities were laughable when measured against the fleets of the major powers. When the Varkay demanded the traditional trial by combat, as was their right under galactic law, everyone had expected the humans to withdraw their application and accept a lesser status as a protected territory. Instead, the humans had accepted the challenge without hesitation, and they had promised to send their champion within 1 standard week. The council members had laughed at this, and even the more sympathetic races had shaken their heads at the foolish pride of these newcomers, who did not understand what they were walking into. Now the day had arrived, and the arena was packed with representatives from every major civilization, all eager to watch the quick and brutal reminder of why the established order existed. Ambassador Krell of the Dominion sat in the highest box with the other senior diplomats, and he leaned forward with interest as the human finally emerged. From the entrance tunnel, a ripple of confused murmurs spread through the crowd as they got their first look at humanity's chosen champion. He was small compared to Zethrak, standing only 6 feet tall, with a body that looked soft and fragile next to the armored giant waiting for him. His name was Marcus Cole, and he was 42 years old, with gray showing at his temples and lines on his face that spoke of a hard life lived under difficult conditions. He wore no armor of any kind, just simple workout clothes that left his arms and legs exposed, and he carried no weapons that anyone could see. His skin showed scars in several places, and his hands were rough and calloused in a way that suggested years of physical labor rather than combat training. The record that the humans had provided said he was a former construction worker from a city called Detroit, and he had no military background or special training that the council could identify. Several of the alien dignitaries actually laughed out loud at the sight of him. And even Zethrak tilted his massive head in what passed for amusement among his kind. This was the champion that humanity had chosen to represent their entire species in the most important moment of their history as a spacefaring civilization. Either the humans were completely ignorant of what they faced, or they had simply given up and sent someone they could afford to lose. Marcus walked to the center of the arena with a calm and steady pace, and his eyes never left the towering form of Zethrak. As he approached, the alien warrior unfolded his arms and let them hang at his sides, each limb ending in claws that could slice through metal as easily as paper. His mandibles clicked together in the Verke expression of anticipation, and a low rumbling sound emerged from his throat that was meant to intimidate prey into freezing with fear. Marcus stopped about 10 feet away from his wise opponent and looked up at the creature that had never known defeat. He did not shake or tremble, and his breathing remained slow, and even as he studied the alien with what appeared to be genuine curiosity rather than terror. Then, he did something that confused everyone watching. He stretched his shoulders, rolled his neck from side to side until it made a cracking sound, and shook out his arms as if he was preparing for nothing more serious than a morning workout. Ambassador Lyrian of the Celestine Order was an archivist by training, and she had studied thousands of species throughout her long career. But she had never seen a creature react to Zethrak with such casual indifference. She pulled out her datapad and began searching for more information about these strange humans. And something in her ancient instincts told her that she was about to witness something unprecedented. The signal chime rang out across the arena, marking the official start of the combat. Zethrak smiled with all 3 rows of his teeth, and his muscles tensed as he prepared to end this farce with a single devastating blow. Marcus Cole simply stood there with his hands at his sides, waiting for whatever came next. He looked almost bored. Zethrak moved with a speed that should have been impossible for a creature of his size, and his primary right fist shot forward like a missile launched from a warship. The blow was meant to end the fight before it could even begin, and every being in the arena knew that nothing made of flesh and bone could survive a direct hit from those armored knuckles. The sound of the impact echoed through the massive stadium like thunder, and a cloud of dust rose from the floor around the spot where the human had been standing. Several of the alien dignitaries looked away, not wanting to see the broken remains of what had once been a living creature. Ambassador Krell of the Dominion actually closed his eyes and shook his head, feeling a moment of pity for the foolish species that had sent this poor man to his death. But then he heard the gasps. They started in the sections closest to the arena floor and spread outward in a wave that eventually reached even the highest seats in the stadium. Krell opened his eyes and looked down at the fighting floor, and what he saw made his secondary heart skip a beat. Marcus Cole was still standing. The human had slid backward about 3 feet from the force of the impact, and his workout shirt had been torn open to reveal a chest that was already turning purple with the beginning of a massive bruise. But his feet remained planted firmly on the ground, and his body was still upright, and his eyes were still locked on Zethrak with an expression that showed no fear at all. The arena fell into a stunned silence that seemed to stretch on forever. Zethrak himself had frozen in place, his extended arms still hanging in the air where it had completed its strike, and his compound eyes were blinking rapidly in what could only be described as pure confusion in over 200 cycles of combat. He had never seen anything survive that blow. He had killed warriors twice his size with that same punch, and he had shattered the shells of creatures specifically bred for durability. How was this fragile little mammal still breathing? Marcus looked down at his chest and touched the bruise with his fingers, pressing against the damaged flesh as if he was testing to see how bad it really was. Then, he looked back up at Zethrak and did something that made the alien's blood run cold. He smiled. "That all you got?" Marcus asked in a voice that was calm and steady and completely unafraid. The words were translated instantly by the arena systems and broadcast to every seat in the stadium. And another wave of shocked murmurs rippled through the crowd. No one had ever spoken to Zethrak that way. No one had ever stood back up after taking one of his blows, and certainly no one had ever smiled at him and asked if that was the Tao best he could do. Zethrak felt something stir in his chest that he did not recognize at first because he had never experienced it before in all his years of combat. It took him a moment to understand that the feeling was anger, pure, burning anger at this insignificant creature who dared to mock him in front of the entire galaxy. He attacked again with all four arms moving at once, each fist riding toward the human from a different angle. Marcus took the first blow to his left shoulder, and the second to his right side, and the third to his stomach, and the fourth to the side of his head. Each impact was delivered with enough force to crack stone, and the combined assault should have reduced any living thing to a broken pile of meat and bone. The human's body jerked and twisted under the barrage, and blood appeared at the corner of his mouth, and his lips split open from the strike to his head. But he did not fall. His knees bent slightly under the force of the attack, but they straightened again almost immediately, and his feet stayed planted on the floor as if they had grown roots. Zethrak stepped back and struck again with his lower right arm, driving a savage uppercut into the human's ribs with a sound like breaking wood. Marcus grunted and more blood spilled from his mouth, and it was clear to everyone watching that something inside him had broken, but still he did not fall. The alien warrior launched into a furious assault, striking the human over and over with blows that would have killed most creatures 10 times over. He used his claws and his fists and even his elbows, attacking from every angle and holding nothing back. The audience watched in horrified fascination as the human was battered from one side of the arena floor to the other. His face was a mask of blood now, and his body showed bruises and cuts in too many places to count, and one of his eyes was swelling shut from a strike that had nearly caved in his skull. Ambassador Lyrin had stopped trying to take notes and was simply staring at the impossible scene before her. She had seen Zethrak fight dozens of times, and she knew exactly how much force those blows carried. The human should have been dead after the first punch, and he should have been reduced to atoms after the first dozen. But there he was, still standing, still breathing, still meeting the alien's eyes without a trace of surrender in his own. Zethrak finally stopped his assault and stood back, his forearms hanging at his sides and his massive chest heaving with exertion. He had never worked this hard in any fight before, and he could feel the burn of exhaustion beginning to spread through his muscles. The human stood in front of him, swaying slightly but refusing to go down. Blood dripped from his face onto the arena floor, creating small puddles around his feet. His breath came in short, painful gasps that suggested his broken ribs were making it hard to fill his lungs, but his hands were still at his sides in a relaxed position, and his legs were still holding him up, and his one good eye was still fixed on Zethrak with an expression that had not changed since the fight began. The crowd had gone completely silent again, and this time the silence was not from shock or confusion. It was from fear, because everyone in that arena was starting to realize that they were watching something that should not be possible. They were watching a creature that simply refused to die, and for the first time in his long and violent life, Zethrak was beginning to understand what it felt like to face an opponent who would not stop coming no matter what he did to them. Human spat a mouthful of blood onto the floor and wiped his chin with the back of his hand, then he smiled again through cracked and bloody lips. "My grandmother hit harder than you," Marcus said, and Zethrak felt the first cold touch of something he had never experienced before. It took him a moment to recognize it as doubt. Zethrak was breathing hard now, and his forearms hung at his sides with a heaviness that he had never felt in combat before. He had been fighting for nearly 20 minutes, which was longer than all of his previous arena battles combined, and his muscles burned with an exhaustion that was completely foreign to him. The human stood before him, swaying like a tree in a strong wind, but somehow still upright on his own 2 feet. Marcus Cole looked like he should be dead. His face was a swollen mess of purple bruises and dried blood, and one of his eyes had swelled completely shut from a blow that would have killed most creatures. His left arm hung at a strange angle that suggested the shoulder had been dislocated, and his chest showed the dark marks of internal bleeding beneath the skin. Every breath he took made a wet rattling sound that told everyone listening that his lungs were damaged and filling with fluid, but his one good eye was still fixed on Zethrak, and there was something in that eye that made the alien warrior want to look away. It was not hatred or anger or even determination. In the way that Zethrak understood those emotions, it was something simpler and somehow more terrifying. It was patience. The human was looking at him the way a predator looks at prey that is already caught, just waiting for the inevitable end to arrive. "How?" Zethrak demanded, and his voice came out as a ragged croak that he barely recognized as his own. Marcus did not answer with words. Instead, he took a step forward, and Zethrak found himself taking a step backward. In response, the movement was instinctive, born from some ancient survival mechanism that had been dormant in the Verke champion for his entire life. He stopped himself immediately, ashamed and confused by his own reaction. But the damage was done. Everyone in the arena had seen it. Galaxy's greatest warrior had retreated from a broken and bloody human who had not thrown a single punch. The whispers started in the crowd, spreading from section to section like a wave rolling across the ocean. Zethrak's mandibles clicked together in frustrated anger, and he forced himself to stand his ground as the human took another step toward him. "Your bones are broken," Zethrak said. "Your organs are damaged. You can barely see, and you cannot even use one of your arms." He gestured at the pitiful state of the human's body with one of his claws. Any sane creature would surrender and beg for mercy. "So why do you keep standing?" Marcus stopped and seemed to consider the question for a moment, tilting his head to one side like he was thinking about the best way to explain something complicated. "Where I come from," he said in a voice that was rough from the blood in his throat. "We have a saying." He paused to spit another mouthful of blood onto the arena floor. "It goes like this. It is not about how hard you can hit." He took another step forward, and this time Zethrak did not retreat even though every instinct in his body screamed at him to move away. "It is about how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward." The human stopped just a few feet away from the massive alien, close enough that Zephyr reached out and crushed his skull with a single blow. But somehow the champion of the Verke Empire could not bring himself to move. "You are the strongest thing I have ever faced," Marcus continued, and there was a strange kind of respect in his voice. "And I mean that as a real compliment." He gestured at his own battered body with his one working arm. "Look what you did to me. Just look at the state I'm in." A painful laugh escaped his bloody lips. "If I was fighting anyone else, I would probably be worried right about now." Zethrak felt a chill run down his spine despite the heat of his exertion. "Then why are you not worried?" he asked, even though part of him did not want to know the answer. Marcus smiled, and it was a terrible thing to see with his split lips and broken teeth, "because I know something that you are just starting to figure out." He leaned forward slightly, and his one good eye seemed to burn with an inner fire that had nothing to do with anger or hatred. "You have hit me with everything you have, and I am still here." He let those words hang in the air between them. "You have used all of your strength, all of your speed, all of the power that made you undefeated for 200 cycles. Another step forward." And now they were close enough that Zethrak could smell the blood on the human's breath. "And I am still standing right in front of you." The alien warrior's compound eyes darted around the arena, looking for something that he could not name. Some escape from this impossible situation that he had never imagined facing. "So now you have to ask yourself a question," Marcus said, and his voice had dropped to barely above a whisper. "What are you going to do when you realize that nothing you can do will make me stop?" Zethrak felt his heart pounding in his chest, and his breathing had become rapid and shallow in a way that had nothing to do with physical exhaustion. He knew this feeling now. He had seen it in the eyes of every opponent he had ever faced. But he had never experienced it himself until this moment. It was fear pure, primal. Overwhelming fear of something that could not be stopped, no matter how much power you threw against it. The human took one more step, and now they were standing face to face. The broken and bloody mammal and the undefeated champion of the galaxy. "I can keep this up forever," Marcus said. "Can you?" And for the first time in his 200 cycles of life, Zethrak of the Vorkai Empire did not know the answer. He looked down at the human who should have been dead 10 times over. And he saw nothing in that one remaining eye except calm certainty. The certainty of someone who had already decided that they would not lose, no matter what the cost. And Zethrak realized with a sinking feeling in his gut that he had no idea how to defeat an enemy like that. Ambassador Lyrian of the Celestine Order had lived for over 3,000 cycles, and in that time she had witnessed events that would have broken lesser minds. She had seen the fall of empires and the birth of new stars. She had watched species rise from primitive beginnings to claim their place among the stars. And she had seen others fade into extinction when they could not adapt to the harsh realities of galactic civilization, but nothing in all. Her long years had prepared her for what she was witnessing in the arena of Titans. Today her hands were shaking as she pulled up the file on humanity that her order had compiled when first contact was made. With the species from Earth, she had skimmed it before, dismissing the humans as just another minor civilization that would either join the galaxy as a subordinate member or fade away like so many before them now. She read every word with the desperate attention of someone who needed to understand how the impossible was happening, right? Before her eyes, the other ambassadors in her section had noticed her frantic research, and they had gathered around her seat to read over her shoulder. "What are they?" Ambassador Krell demanded, his voice carrying a note of panic that she had never heard from the usually composed. Diplomat Lyrian did not answer immediately because she was still reading, and every new fact she discovered made her hearts beat faster with growing alarm. Finally, she looked up at the assembled dignitaries and spoke in a voice that trembled slightly despite her best efforts to control it. "They are survivors," she said. The word hung in the air between them, and Krell made an impatient gesture with his tentacles. "All species are survivors in some sense," he said, "or they would not exist to join galactic civilization." Lyrian shook her head slowly. "Not like this," she said. "Not like the humans." She turned her datapad so the others could see the information displayed on its surface, and she began to explain what her order had learned about the small blue world called Earth. "Their planet is what we would classify as a Category 12 death world," she said. And several of the ambassadors made sounds of disbelief. "That is impossible," said a Trellan diplomat whose name Lyrian could not remember. "No intelligent species has ever evolved on a world above Category 7. And yet they did," Lyrian replied. And the evidence suggests that it was precisely because of those conditions that they became what they are. She began to list the hazards that humans had faced during their evolution. And with each new fact, the faces of her audience grew more disturbed. Their planet had a gravity that was considered crushing by galactic standards, a force that had shaped their bones and muscles into something far denser and stronger than most species possessed. Their atmosphere contained a gas called oxygen at concentrations that would be toxic to most life forms, and their bodies had evolved to burn this gas in a process that gave them incredible endurance. Their world experienced dramatic climate shifts that had covered huge portions of the surface in ice, and the ancestors of modern humans had survived these ice ages through sheer determination. They had predators that hunted them from every direction, creatures with claws and teeth that saw humans as nothing more than food. They had diseases that ravaged their populations and natural disasters that destroyed everything. They built volcanoes had buried their cities in ash, and earthquakes had shattered their homes, and floods had drowned entire civilizations in a matter of days. And through all of this, Liren said, they survived. She explained how humans had evolved a method of hunting that was unique in the known galaxy. They could not run faster than their prey, and they did not have claws or fangs to bring down large animals. Instead, they simply followed their prey at a steady pace, never stopping, never resting, until the animal they were hunting collapsed from exhaustion. They could run for hours without rest, covering distances that would kill most species. And they did this under the brutal heat of their home world's sun. Their bodies were designed to break and then repair themselves stronger than before. Their bones would crack under stress and then heal with additional density at the fracture points. Their muscles would tear during extreme exertion and then rebuild with more fibers than they had before. Every injury they survived made them more resilient for the next challenge, but it was not their bodies that truly set them. Liren pulled up another section of the file, and her voice dropped to barely above a whisper as she shared what she considered the most terrifying information of all. They can ignore pain, she said. The ambassadors stared at her in confusion, not understanding what she meant. All species can suppress pain to some degree, Krell said. It is a basic survival mechanism. Not like this, Liren replied. Humans have developed something that no other known species possesses, an ability to simply decide that pain is not important enough to stop them. She explained how human history was filled with examples of individuals who had accomplished impossible feats through nothing but raw willpower. They had stories of warriors who continued fighting with wounds that should have been instantly fatal. They had records of explorers who had walked across frozen wastelands with frostbitten limbs, refusing to stop until they reached their destination. They had tales of survivors who had endured unimaginable suffering for years, keeping themselves alive through sheer stubborn refusal to die. Their language had dozens of words for this trait, and they taught it to their children as one of the highest virtues. They called it willpower, determination, grit, stubbornness, and spite. They celebrated those who demonstrated it. In their stories and their songs, they considered it the defining characteristic of what it meant to be human. That man down there, Liren said, pointing at Marcus Cole, who was still standing despite everything Zethrak had done to him, is not superhuman by his species standards. She paused to let that sink in. He is exactly, perfectly, and terrifyingly what every human is capable of becoming when they decide that they will not lose. The ambassadors turned to look back at the arena floor, and they saw the battered and bloody humans still facing the galaxy's greatest warrior, and for the first time, they began to understand why they should be afraid. Because if one ordinary human could do this, What would happen when their entire civilization was threatened? What would a species capable of this kind of determination do if they were ever pushed to their limits? Lyrian closed her datapad and watched the fight continue below. She had a terrible feeling that the galaxy was about to find out. The arena of Titans had witnessed thousands of battles over its long history, and every single one of them had ended with violence. Champions had fallen in pools of their own blood, and warriors had screamed in agony as their bodies were torn apart by opponents stronger or faster or more skilled than themselves. Victory had always been measured in broken bones and spilled blood, and the final, desperate cries of the defeated. But this battle would end differently. Marcus Cole stood before the greatest warrior the galaxy had ever produced, and he did not raise his fists or prepare for another exchange of blows. He simply waited. His body was a ruin of bruises and blood and broken bones, and by any reasonable measure, he should have been unable to stand, let alone continue fighting. But reason had left this arena long ago, replaced by something that the gathered aliens could not understand or explain. The human waited because he had already won, and everyone watching knew it, even if they could not bring themselves to admit it. Sethrak's forearms trembled at his sides, and his compound eyes reflected a turmoil of emotions that the Verkai champion had never experienced in all his long years of combat. He could still kill this human. He knew that with absolute certainty. One more blow from his armored fists would shatter the fragile skull and end this nightmare forever. But what would happen after that? Another human would come to take this one's place, and that human would stand just as firmly and refuse to fall just as stubbornly. And then another would come after that, and another, until the Verkai realized that killing humans was pointless, because more would always arrive to take the place of the fallen. That was what he saw in the human's one remaining eye, not defiance of death, but acceptance of it. This creature was not afraid to die, and that made him more dangerous than any opponent Zethrak had ever faced. Yield, Marcus said in a quiet voice that somehow carried to every corner of the silent arena. The word hung in the air like a physical thing, heavy with meaning that went far beyond its simple definitions. The Thrak's mandibles clicked together in what might have been a laugh or might have been a sob. "You are asking me to surrender," he said, and his voice cracked on the last word. Marcus shook his head slowly, and the movement made him wince as his damaged neck protested. "I am not asking," he said. "I am giving you a choice." He took a small step backward, giving the alien warrior some room to breathe. "You can yield now and walk out of this arena with your honor intact." The champion who finally met an opponent worthy of his respect. His bloody lips twisted into something that was almost kind. "Or you can keep fighting until one of us falls. And we both know that I am not going to be the one who stops." Zethrak looked at the human for a long moment, and something passed between them that the watching audience could not fully understand. It was recognition. The alien warrior had spent his entire life searching for an opponent who could match his strength, someone who could push him to his limits and force him to become better than he was. He had never found that opponent because he had been looking for the wrong thing. Strength was not about how hard you could hit, it was about how much you could endure and still keep going, and by that measure, this broken and bleeding human was the strongest creature Zethrak had ever encountered. Slowly, with a deliberate grace that somehow maintained his dignity, the champion of the Verkai Empire lowered his forearms to his sides, his head bowed forward in the traditional gesture of surrender that had not been seen in this arena for over 2 centuries. "I yield," Zethrak said, and his voice was clear enough to reach every seat in the stadium. The silence that followed lasted for exactly 3 heartbeats. Then the arena exploded into chaos. Millions of voices raised in shock and disbelief, and something that might have been awe filled the massive space with a roar that shook the very foundations of the Structure Ambassador Lyrian of the Celestine Order sat frozen in her seat, her datapad forgotten in her lap. As she watched the impossible unfold before her eyes, Ambassador Krell of the Dominion had covered his face with his tentacles, unable to process what he had just witnessed. The other diplomats and dignitaries were shouting and gesturing and trying to understand how everything they knew about the Galactic Order had just been turned upside down on the arena floor. Marcus Cole allowed himself to sway slightly now that the battle was truly over. His body was demanding that he collapse and rest and allow the healing to begin. But he forced himself to remain standing for a few more moments. Seth straightened and met the human's eyes one more time. "What are you?" the alien asked, and there was genuine curiosity beneath the exhaustion in his voice. Marcus thought about the question for a moment before answering. "We are human," he said. As if that explained everything, and perhaps it did, he turned and began to walk toward the exit tunnel. Each step a small victory against the pain that screamed through every nerve in his body. The crowd continued to roar around him, but he barely heard. Ide was thinking about his daughter back home, who had told him to be careful before he left. He was thinking about his wife, who had kissed him goodbye and made him promise to come back in one piece. He was thinking about all the humans throughout history who had faced impossible odds and refused to give up. The ancestors whose stubborn determination had been passed down through countless generations until it reached him. He was just one man from Detroit who had worked construction for 20 years and raised a family and lived an ordinary life by human standards, but today he had shown the galaxy what ordinary humans were capable of when they decided that they would not lose. Ambassador Lyrian watched him go, and she finally understood what the humans brought to galactic civilization. It was not their technology or their military power or their resources. It was the simple, terrifying knowledge that they would never, ever give up. As Marcus Cole disappeared into the exit tunnel, the gathered aliens looked at each other with new understanding in their eyes. Humanity had earned its place among the stars today, not through conquest or intimidation, but through something far more powerful. They had proven that strength was not about the force of your blows. It was about the depth of your will, and in that arena, on that day, no creature in the galaxy could match what one ordinary human had shown them all. The future of the cosmos had just changed forever, and everyone who had witnessed this battle knew it. Humanity was here to stay, and they would not be moved.